By the 40th dawn, the physicians had stopped pretending they had a remedy left to offer. They stood at the edge of the dragon grounds, in a loose, exhausted half-circle, the same 6 men who had stood there every morning for a month and a half. Watching Emperor Rhael hold himself upright through sheer refusal rather than strength, and the senior physician, an old man named Corwith who had served 3 reigns and buried 2 emperors, said, quietly, to no one in particular, the thing none of them had yet said aloud in the emperor's hearing. 40 days, Corwith said. I have read every text this palace holds on dragon physiology, majesty, and every one of them agrees on the same terrible arithmetic. A dragon can survive weeks without food, days without water. But sleep is not a luxury for your kind. It is architecture. It is when the 2 shapes, human and dragon, renegotiate which one is load-bearing. 40 days without it, and the negotiation begins to fail. You will lose the clean line between the shapes. You will begin, majesty, to be neither one safely. Rhael, coiled in dragon form at the center of the grounds, because even his own bedchamber had come to feel like a trap he could not risk closing his eyes inside, turned one great weary eye toward the physician and said nothing, because he had said everything there was to say about this particular problem in the 39 mornings before this one, and none of it had produced a solution. The problem, in its bones, was simple. Word had reached him 41 days ago, unconfirmed, uncorroborated, but from a source who had never once been wrong in 14 years, that House Vered, a rival noble family with an old grudge and a newer appetite, was moving pieces into position for something the intelligence report called, with careful imperial understatement, a change in succession arrangements. Not an army, nothing so crude, a slow, patient infiltration of council seats, garrison commands, and treasury access that would only become visible and only become stoppable if someone stayed awake watching every hour it assembled. He did not trust a single soul at court enough to hand them that watching. Not entirely their fault. 14 years of rule teach a man exactly how much even loyal servants can be turned, bribed, or simply outmaneuvered without meaning to be. So Emperor Rhael had made the decision, on the first night, that he alone would keep the watch, sleepless, until the threat resolved one way or the other. 40 nights later, the threat had not resolved, and neither had he. I want you to understand precisely what those 40 days had cost him, because the court, focused entirely on the political crisis, had mostly missed the more immediate one unfolding in front of them. The great scaled body that had once moved with an economy of motion so practiced it looked like water now carried itself the way exhausted things carry themselves everywhere. A half-second delay between decision and motion, a tremor in the hindquarters that Corwith's trained eye caught and logged every morning with visibly deepening alarm, a dullness behind the eyes that no amount of will could entirely mask. He had stopped, 12 days ago, being able to reliably hold human shape for longer than an hour at a stretch. The shift itself, Corwith explained, cost energy that a rested body barely notices spending, and an exhausted one could not spare. Worse, and this was the detail Corwith circled back to every single morning, with the particular insistence of a man trying to make an unlistening patient finally hear him, the 2 shapes were beginning, faintly, to blur at the edges, scale texture persisting for a few seconds into what should have been clean human skin. A flicker, twice now, where witnesses swore the Emperor's eyes had shown reptile gold in the middle of an entirely human sentence. This is not vanity, Majesty, and it is not comfort I am asking you to consider, Corwith said, on the 40th morning, with the flat courage of an old man who has run out of gentler ways to say a hard thing. It is structural. Continue this course, and within the week, you will not be choosing between sleep and vigilance. You will be choosing between losing the throne to House Vered, or losing your own coherent shape to exhaustion, and handing them the throne anyway, empty, because there will be no one left inside it, capable of holding it. Rhael heard this, as he had heard some version of it for a week now, and said the only true thing he had left to offer in response. I do not disagree with your arithmetic, Corwith. I simply do not have a watcher I trust enough to close my eyes in front of. It was, he would think much later, the exact wrong week to make that particular claim absolute, because the palace was about to prove him wrong from a direction none of his intelligence reports had thought to cover at all. Briar Aldene had joined the border garrison's night watch 14 months earlier, and she had done it for the single, practical reason that governed most of her decisions since her brother died. It gave her somewhere to put the hours she was not going to spend sleeping anyway. She was 27, raised on a hill farm 2 days from the capital, and until 2 years ago she had been, by her own accounting, an entirely ordinary shepherdess, with an entirely ordinary twin brother named Cade, who had joined the border patrol the season they both turned 25, the way half the farm boys in that district eventually did. He had died on this exact stretch of border, in a skirmish so minor it warranted 2 lines in the official record, and Briar had spent the 2 years since discovering that some griefs do not soften with distance. They simply relocate. Hers had relocated into her chest at approximately the hour of night when sleep should have arrived, and had declined ever since to leave. So she had stopped fighting it. She had walked to the garrison, asked for the position nobody wanted, the deep night watch, the hours between the second bell and dawn that most soldiers dreaded, and had been keeping it, without complaint and without a single missed shift, for 14 months. The other watchmen thought her strange. The commander thought her his most reliable soldier, because a woman who genuinely could not sleep made, it turned out, an exceptional sentry. She did not know, on the ordinary autumn evening this story turns on, that anything about her posting had changed. She only knew that the far watch post near the old Dragon Grounds gate had been quietly cleared of its usual detail that week, and that she had been reassigned there without explanation, and that reassignments without explanation were, in her 14 months of experience, usually the palace's way of saying a matter was sensitive enough that fewer eyes were considered safer. She walked her new post at the edge of the grounds at the second bell, exactly on schedule, exactly as she always did, and found, coiled in the dark at the center of the enclosure, a shape she had only ever seen before, at a great and ceremonial distance. I promised I would tell you why Briar's own nights had stopped holding sleep, and I will tell you now, because it is the whole reason the 40th night went differently than the 39 before it. Cade had died at the second bell. That detail, the exact hour, was not in the official report, but Briar had gotten it eventually, in fragments, from a soldier who had served beside him and could not quite look her in the eye while telling it. Second bell, the deep dark, the hour when a watch is thinnest, and a man is most alone with whatever comes for him. She had turned that fact over so many times in 2 years that it had worn a groove in her the way water wears a groove in stone, and the groove, unhelpfully, ran directly through the exact hours she was now paid to be awake anyway. She had told no one at the garrison the real reason she'd requested the night watch. She let them believe it was simple stoicism, a hard worker taking the shift no one wanted. The truth was smaller and harder to say aloud. She could not sleep through the second bell regardless of where she was standing, so she had decided, with the particular grim practicality of grief that has run out of gentler options, that she would rather be awake and useful than awake and useless, staring at a farmhouse ceiling 2 days from anywhere that mattered. She thought of Cade every single night at that hour, without exception, in the specific and exhausting way of a wound that has never been permitted to close. She had stopped, somewhere in the second year, expecting it to stop. She had simply built a life around the fact that it wouldn't. So when she walked into the Dragon Grounds at the second bell, and found an emperor she recognized instantly from ceremonial portraits, coiled and visibly failing in the dark, some part of her, the part that had spent 2 years learning exactly what unwatched suffering at that particular hour looked like, did not think of protocol, or rank, or the considerable danger of approaching an unfamiliar dragon at close range. She thought, I know this hour. I know exactly what it is to be alone in it. She should have reported the sighting, and withdrawn to a proper distance, as 14 months of training had drilled into her. She did not. You are meant to have 6 physicians and a full guard detail watching this enclosure, Briar said instead, walking the perimeter fence with the unhurried authority of someone conducting an entirely routine patrol, because routine, she had learned, was the only language her own grief ever fully respected. I count 0 of either. I am going to assume that is by your own order, Majesty, since I cannot imagine a council allowing it otherwise, and I am going to further assume you have a reason for it that is none of my business." The great head turned toward her, slow with exhaustion, and the enormous eye that found her held an attention that surprised her with its clarity, given how visibly worn everything else about him had become. "You would assume correctly," Rhael said, his voice roughened by more than a month of disuse in any register above command. "I find I do not currently trust anyone assigned to watch me. It has become, I am told, something of a structural problem. I am not assigned to watch you," Briar said. "I am assigned to walk this fence line until dawn, which I intend to do regardless of what happens to be coiled inside it." "You are welcome to consider that a coincidence rather than a vigil, Majesty. I find coincidences easier to sit with than duties, most nights." It was, though neither of them yet understood it, exactly the right thing to have said. A vigil implied a watcher with an agenda, someone measuring him, someone he would have to perform coherence for. A coincidence, a soldier simply doing an unrelated job in his vicinity, entirely unconcerned with his condition, asked nothing of him at all. She walked her fence line twice, in full view, deliberately unhurried, and on the third pass, when her circuit brought her back past the enclosure's center, she did the thing that no physician, no council member, and no member of his own guard had managed in 40 days. She sat down, not near him in the careful, calculated way of someone approaching a wounded animal. She simply lowered herself to the cold ground against the warm scaled wall of his flank, the way she might have sat against a hillside boulder on watch back home, and pulled her cloak around her shoulders, and continued doing exactly what she had been doing all along, keeping watch through an hour she could not have slept through in any case, at any post, for any reason. "I am not settling in to observe you, if that is a concern," she said, without looking at him, staring instead out at the dark tree line beyond the fence, the way a sentry actually watches. "I am simply going to sit here until the 4th bell, because the ground is cold and this wall is warm, and I have found, in 14 months of this work, that a soldier takes warmth where the post offers it and asks no one's permission first." Rhael said nothing for a long while. The weight of her back against his ribs was slight. She weighed. He found himself absurdly calculating, perhaps a 40th of what he did in this form, and utterly unlike the weight of every other presence that had tried to keep this vigil with him across 40 exhausting nights. Corwith's presence carried the weight of medical alarm. His guards carried the weight of duty and fear in equal measure. Every minister who had attempted a shift carried, whether they intended it or not, the weight of political calculation. Briar Aldene, leaning her spine against his, and staring at a tree line, for reasons that had nothing to do with him at all, carried no weight whatsoever that he could detect except her own private, unrelated grief, running its own separate course at its own separate hour, entirely indifferent to his crown. It was, he understood with the last clear thought his exhausted mind produced, the first entirely unweighted presence he had felt in 14 years of rule. He did not decide to sleep. That was the thing he would try, later, many times, to explain to a court that wanted a more dramatic account of the moment. There was no decision, no dropping of guard, no conscious verdict that this stranger could be trusted with the crown's most dangerous vulnerability. There was only the accumulated weight of 40 days finally meeting a back that asked nothing of him, and the great scaled eye, heavy past any further argument, simply stopped fighting to stay open. Briar felt it happen rather than saw it, the shift in his breathing first, slow and then slower, then the subtle settling of 40 tons of coiled vigilance finally, incrementally, allowing itself to become 40 tons of simple weight. She sat very still, understanding with the plain instinct of someone who has spent 2 years cataloging the difference between rest and its absence, exactly what she was witnessing, and did the only thing that seemed right to do with it. She kept watch. Properly, thoroughly, the way she had been trained, eyes on the tree line and the fence line and the middle distance where trouble tends to announce itself first. Except that now her watch had acquired an unspoken second purpose that no garrison commander had assigned her, and that she took up anyway, without hesitation, because it cost her nothing she was not already spending on an empty hillside 2 days from anywhere. She watched, in addition to the border, the steady rise and fall of the Emperor's breathing, and she did not move, and she did not leave, and she did not let the fourth bell's ordinary changing of the guard so much as approach the enclosure's gate, without turning them quietly away herself. He slept until dawn. It was the first unbroken night's rest Emperor Rhael had taken in 41 days, and it happened against the spine of a woman keeping an entirely unrelated vigil of her own. At the 1 hour of night neither of them had ever expected anyone else alive to understand. There is a smaller scene from that first dawn that the flight master's report never captured, because no duty log records a conversation that happened after a shift technically ended, and I want to give it to you now because it explains something about Briar that the rest of the story only gestures at. When Rhael woke, disoriented in the way of someone surfacing from the deepest sleep of his adult life, his first clear sight was not the tree line, or the fence, or even the dawn itself. It was Briar, still seated exactly where she had been all night, watching the middle distance with the flat, practiced attention of a soldier who has not once let her guard drop despite 6 hours of stillness. "You did not sleep at all," he said, working out the shape of the realization slowly, the way exhausted minds circle back to obvious things. "You sat here the entire night so that I could, and you gained nothing from the arrangement yourself. I gained a quiet fence line and a warm wall to lean against instead of a cold hillside 2 days from anywhere," Briar said. "I do not sleep at this hour regardless of where I am posted, Majesty. I have simply never before had quite such an interesting wall to spend it against." He studied her for a long moment, the exhaustion clearing enough now to actually see her properly for the first time. Not the soldier who had happened to be posted nearby, but a woman carrying her own considerable weight through the exact hours she had just spent guarding his. "That is not an equal trade," he said. "You kept a vigil so that I could set mine down, and received nothing back for it but the same sleepless hour you would have kept anyway." "I do not think kindness requires an equal trade to count, Majesty," Briar said, standing at last, brushing the frost from her cloak with the brisk unceremony of a woman returning to an ordinary day. "If it did, very little of it would ever get done. I watched a border, because that is my post. I sat against a warm wall, because the ground was cold. That the wall happened to be an emperor who badly needed the company is, I would say, entirely his good fortune, and none of my particular virtue." It was, Rhael would tell Corwith later that same morning, the exact sentence that had finally convinced him the physician's 40 days of prescribed remedies had been aiming at entirely the wrong target all along. They had been trying to manufacture trust through credentials and vetting and careful selection. What his exhausted body had actually needed was simpler and stranger than any of it, someone who had never once calculated what watching him might be worth. While the Emperor slept, for the first time in 41 days, the crisis he had been sleeplessly guarding against did not, as it happened, arrive in the form he had spent 6 weeks bracing for. House Verid's slow infiltration had indeed been real. Corwith's contact had not been wrong, but the plan had never actually depended on the single dramatic night of vulnerability Rhael's exhausted mind had spent weeks fixated on preventing. It depended, instead, on a council vote scheduled a full 9 days out, a vote about Garrison funding that a rested, sharp-minded emperor could counter in an afternoon of ordinary political maneuvering, and that an emperor ground down to incoherence by 6 weeks of self-imposed sleeplessness would have been in no state to counter at all. This was the cruel arithmetic that Corwith had been trying, for a week, to make him see. The vigilance itself, taken past the point of diminishing returns, had become the vulnerability. House Verid did not need a sleepless night to exploit. They needed an exhausted emperor blundering through a council session 9 days hence, and every night Rhael spent depriving himself of rest in the name of guarding against them was a night spent building exactly the weakness they were patiently waiting to walk through. Briar, keeping her unassigned second watch through those small hours, had no way of knowing any of this court arithmetic. She knew only that the great scaled body beside her breathed slow and even for the first time since she'd arrived, and that whatever burden had been keeping an emperor awake for 41 nights seemed, in sleep, to have set itself down at last, and that setting a burden down, in her considerable private experience, was very often when a person finally had enough strength left to actually solve it. He woke at true dawn, clear-eyed in a way the palace had not seen from him in 6 weeks, and the first thing Emperor Rhael did with that clarity was walk, in human form, on his own 2 feet, without a single flicker of scale at the edges, directly into the physician's morning briefing, and inform an astonished Corwith that he required, within the hour, the full service record of a night watch soldier named Briar Aldene. What followed, over the next several days, unfolded with the swiftness of a mind finally rested enough to actually think. The Garrison funding vote was identified as the true target 9 days out. Rhael, sharp and present for the first time in weeks, dismantled House Vered's positioning in a single decisive council session that left the rival families' carefully laid infiltration in visible disarray. And the court, recovering from 6 weeks of watching their emperor visibly deteriorate, discovered with considerable astonishment that whatever had finally allowed him to sleep had also, apparently, saved the throne house Vared had been quietly circling. The flight master, every reign, it seemed, had one of these steady old soldiers who noticed everything and said little, was the one who finally pieced together, from the garrison's own duty logs, exactly what had happened at the Dragon Grounds gate on the 40th night. He brought the report to Rhael personally, with the particular dry understatement of a man who has served long enough to find very little genuinely surprising anymore. A night watch soldier reassigned to an empty post, Majesty, who took it upon herself to turn away the 4th bell relief and keep an unassigned second watch until dawn, the flight master said. The garrison commander wishes it noted, in her defense, that turning away a scheduled relief without authorization is technically a disciplinary matter. Is it? Rhael said, in the flat tone of a man already composing the commander's response for him. It is also, Majesty, apparently the reason you are currently capable of holding a coherent council session for the first time in a month and a half. I have recommended the commander file the paperwork as a commendation instead. He agreed with unusual speed. Rhael found her at the garrison 2 days later, off duty, sitting on the same low boundary wall where she took her meals between shifts, and he came without ceremony, without guard, in the same plain travel dress he had once worn to a lighthouse coast in a different province's story, because some griefs, some debts, apparently taught every emperor who carried them the same instinct toward arriving quietly. I am told, he said, that you turned away a scheduled relief without authorization, and that I owe my current ability to string a coherent sentence together entirely to that infraction. I turned away the relief because you were finally asleep, Majesty, and I have some limited experience with how rare and fragile that particular condition can be, Briar said, not standing, not performing the deference the court would have expected. It seemed a poor moment to let procedure interrupt it. May I ask why? He said, sitting on the wall beside her without invitation, the way she had sat against his flank without one. An ordinary night watch soldier understood that so much more clearly than 6 physicians and an entire council of ministers. She was quiet a moment, turning the question over with the same plain honesty she gave everything. My twin brother died on this border 2 years ago, she said finally. At the second bell. I have not slept through that hour since, Majesty, in any bed, at any post, for any reason, and I stopped fighting it about a year ago, and simply built a life around keeping watch through it instead. When I found you at that hour, coiled and failing and entirely alone in it, I did not see an emperor who needed managing. I saw someone keeping the exact vigil I keep every single night, and I understood, better than any physician could have told you, that the reason you could not sleep was that everyone trying to help you was still asking something of you. I was not. I was only sitting where the wall was warm. Rhael was silent a long while, looking out at the same tree line she had watched for him. There is a line in an old text my mother used to read me, he said eventually, from a book of psalms the border chaplains still keep. He giveth his beloved sleep. I always thought it a strange, small line for something so large a claim to rest on. That rest itself could be a gift given by one person to another, rather than simply the absence of trouble. I understand it rather better now. I did not give you anything, Majesty, Briar said. I only sat where I was already sitting. That, Rhael said, is precisely the gift I have not been able to purchase, command, or negotiate for in 14 years of rule. A presence that wants nothing from me. I would like, if you will permit it, to learn whether that particular gift is one you would consider sitting beside more than once. She married him the following autumn, in a ceremony held, at her own quiet insistence, at the second bell, the hour that had once been the loneliest of her life, reclaimed, in front of the whole assembled court, as the hour two people who understood exactly what unwatched suffering looked like had first sat down beside each other and asked nothing at all in return. Her brother's name was read aloud in the ceremony, at her request, because some griefs do not need to be cured to be honored, only carried by someone willing to sit beside the weight of them. The physicians, in the years that followed, noted with professional satisfaction that the emperor never again went more than a handful of nights without proper rest, no matter how grave the crisis, because he had learned, at last, at the cost of 40 exhausted days, that a throne is not, in fact, best defended by a man too depleted to think clearly, and that the truest watch a person can keep over you is not the one that measures your every breath, but the one that simply sits down, unasked, and lets you finally close your eyes. He giveth his beloved sleep. Briar Aldene had spent 2 years learning that grief does not always ask to be fixed. Sometimes it only asks for company through the hour it visits. She gave that company to an emperor who had forgotten it was possible to receive it, and in the giving, found, at last, that her own longest hour of the night had grown a little less lonely too.